Good evening, everyone. With great joy and immense exultation, I feel privileged to extend my warm welcome to all and one present here. India, through her G20 presidency, is leading its efforts in stirring dialogues on various issues that promote collaborations economically to help sustenance and growth for all. Today, we at Gujarat University are proud to be hosting this THINK20 event of G20 to talk about the composition of a think tank that will work towards the key pillars of THINK20 in India's G20 presidency. It's being organized by Gujarat University in partnership with Observer Research Foundation, Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis, and Ahmedabad Management Association. Gujarat University is one of the premier educational institutions of the country, located in Ahmedabad, Gujarat, and has been serving the educational needs of the people of Gujarat for over 70 years now. Gujarat University, established in 1949, has since become one of the largest and most respected universities in the country, with over 350 affiliated colleges and institutes in various fields of study, including arts, science, commerce, law, education, medicine, and engineering and management. Gujarat University is known for its active research culture, commitment to academic excellence, promoting social and cultural values, and excellence in higher education in the country. Ranked number 1 in Gujarat among state universities across various rankings, as well as number 7 in India in innovation and startup achievements, Gujarat University has taken several leaps to become a global destination for students for high quality education and co-curricular activities. We welcome you with this vibrant institute to join us for celebrating and creating a think tank for G20. Thank you. Before we go ahead, it's time to felicitate the dignitaries on the dais. I request Professor Himanshu Pandya to present a shawl and bouquet to Ambassador Sujan Chinoy, T20 Chair for India's G20 Presidency, and Director General Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis. I request Mr. Divyesh Radia to present Ambassador Sujan Chinoy with a memento. I would now like to request Professor Rakesh Rawal. Yes. I now would like to request Professor Rakesh Rawal to present bouquet and shawl to Mr. Anirban Sarma, Task Force 2 Chair and Senior Fellow, Observer Research Foundation. Thank you. I would now like to request Mr. Unmesh Dikshit to please present a bouquet and shawl to Mr. Varun Zaveri, advisor at Y20, Youth 20. Thank you. Thank you to our dignitaries and all the audiences and all the delegates here present. I would now like to hand it over to Anandita to take it forward. Thank you.
Namaskar, good evening to all of you present here, to the dignitaries as well as those present in the audience. As we know that the theme for today's event is Key Pillars of THINK20 in India's G20 Presidency. So THINK20 is essentially the ideas bank for the G20 Presidency of India, and all the policy recommendations and the various inputs that have been culled out during its significant meetings that have taken place and will take place further till August will all be seen and feed into the Sherpa track, which will finally reflect in the India's annual G20 summit, which is to take place in September. So we're really eager to hear what our experts here on stage and the brilliant young minds amongst all of you have to share with us. But before we proceed with that, I would like to request Professor Himanshu Pandya, Vice Chancellor, Gujarat University, to kindly deliver his welcome remarks. Over to you, sir.
Good evening. I'm really thrilled to see all these students, those who are sitting on the staircase, to listen to the future of this country. But mind well, we are not supposed to. Thank you. And I thank you all for being here. I know 50% of you are not knowing even that what sort of delivery is going to happen here. Believe me, it's a golden opportunity for all of us that we are going to witness how the think tank about the growth of this great country is going to shape in future. Being a presidency country, we have evolved with our practices, and the world is looking at India for better delivery system and better coordination. I think with the highest involvement in Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, we only can deliver what the world is waiting for. And for that, each one of you is equally important. Nobody can work in silo and reach to the excellence. We have to have coordination, we have to have network, we have to have understanding where we are thinking of others also. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam ka jo concept hai, it's very clear that everybody on this earth, we all are living under the fatherhood of God, and it's a universal brotherhood what we are going to propagate. Since centuries, we are doing this, nothing new to us, but now it's a time where we are talking to each other, we are being in coordination with each other for our requirements. Friends, what agriculture department is doing, health department is hardly knowing this. What our finances are working on, so the distribution of fund is again at a big question mark. It's not about India, it's about G20, means all the neighboring countries, those who are like-minded and going to perform for the better future and better tomorrow, they have to have in coordination with each other. And I think if you can talk to your neighbors, that is the best way for sustainable living and coexistence. And with this particular opportunity, being a young minds and bubbling with energy, you all are starving something in you that, okay, I want to contribute, then how? That is the question. Today, we are having the highest authority whom we believe as a mentor, and fortunately he is the student and alumni of this university. We have Honorable Suzanne Sina with us. And it's all inspiration for all of us that one day you can be also there on that dais to address like this G20 presidency is somewhere after 20 or 21 years to come. Friends, whenever somebody puts mic before us, we have a lot of questions and a lot of queries to ask. This is the time where you can share your ideas, you can share your capabilities and your understanding with the global leaders and come up with some solution which can serve the purpose. Sustainability is a big question. Right now, what I can see in this auditorium, 60% females are there. That means one of the theme is women-led enterprise is there for this G20, and you have a golden opportunity to perform to that. I'm really happy and really thrilled to have this T20 event in our campus, and all of you are here to listen to the future of this country and how we are going to lead and how we are going to, जो बताते ना हमको कि आपको पूरे विश्व गुरु बनना है. How you can be a world leader? You have to have that qualities within you to disseminate those knowledge to the needed people. And I think sustainability is the only way where we can address the Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Once again, thank you very much for selecting Gujarat University and giving us this opportunity to be part of this wonderful event. And organizers are really wonderful, I tell you. They have hardly allowed us to go with the theme and the discussions what we are going to deliver today. But really, we are thankful to all the organizers from the bottom of our heart that they gave us this opportunity to be with you people. आज इनको सुनना है हमको और हमको अपने फीड्स देने हैं. उस सब के लिए आपको बहुत बहुत बधाई. धन्यवाद.
Thank you, sir, for those insightful remarks. You very rightly pointed out the philosophy and the meaning of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam and how it's a one world, one family. And proceeding with that very philosophy, I would like to call upon the first person to make his presentation, Mr. Anirban Sarma. He is the chair for Task Force 2 of T20 and also a senior fellow at ORF. Sir will be addressing the issue of common digital future, affordable, accessible, and inclusive digital public infrastructure. Over to you, sir.
Well, a very good evening to all of you, and dear Professor Pandya, Ambassador Chenoy, Mr. Divyesh Radia and Mr. Varun Jhaveri, dignitaries, colleagues and friends. A very good evening once again, and it's a pleasure to be here at this T20 side event in Ahmedabad. At the very outset, of course, I'd like to thank Gujarat University and the Ahmedabad Management Association for bringing us all together and hosting us this evening. My personal thanks are also due to Mr. Unmesh Dikshit and Mr. George Varugis of the AMA and Mr. Rahul Bhagchantani of the GUSEC for helping me get here in the most real sense. Now, the title of my presentation, as Anindita just said, is Our Common Digital Future, Affordable, Accessible and Inclusive Digital Public Infrastructure, or DPI for short. So I'd like to examine the idea and uses of DPIs in the context of India's G20 presidency and also of our collective efforts to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And here I will probably complement a bit of what Professor Himanshu Pandya just said about sustainability really being the way forward for us today. Now, earlier last year, the Indian government listed the promotion of DPIs, or digital public infrastructure, as a priority for India's G20 presidency. And given the success of some of our own infrastructures, such as Aadhaar and the UPI, India is certainly uniquely positioned to mainstream the discourse around DPIs into the global digital agenda. As a result of India's leadership in this space, DPIs have become an important focus, a key pillar, so to speak, of some of the working groups and engagement groups under the Indian G20 presidency, including, of course, the T20 Task Force on Digital Affairs that I'm a part of. The COVID pandemic and more recently the Ukraine war have in many ways driven home the importance of DPIs. Several countries use their platforms during these crises to provide assistance and targeted social protection to their citizens in various ways. And globally, in the last few years, there has been a marked rise in the demand for DPIs around the world, and their development has now emerged as a new area for international collaboration. But what really is a DPI and what does it do? Broadly understood, they are foundational population-scale technology systems such as identity systems, social registries, and payment systems upon which our digital economy is built. But when we examine the idea of DPIs more closely, we find that they actually do three very specific things. They mediate the flow of people, money, and information. First, they enable the flow of people through a digital identity system. Second, the flow of money is mediated through real-time fast payment systems. And third, of course, the flow of personal information takes place through these consent-based data sharing systems, which empower citizens in a very real sense with an ability to control their data. And this actually helps actualize the benefits of DPIs in many ways. Now, once these three building blocks are in place, they become the base for developing an effective DPI ecosystem. And this is exactly where the uniqueness and robustness of the Indian approach comes in. India, through a composite architecture called India Stack, which some of you may have heard of, became the first country in the world to develop all these three foundational DPIs together. A digital identity, which you all know as Aadhaar, a real-time fast payment system, which is our UPI or Unified Payments Interface, and also a platform to safely share personal data without compromising privacy. And this third one is a little less well-known than the first two. This is the Data Empowerment and Protection Architecture, the DEPA, which has these account aggregators built into it, which actually help protect privacy and help you share information. Now, each of these DPI layers, as you can make out, addresses a rather different function, has a clear need, and they generate considerable value across sectors. When they work together, and in practice, you will find that these three layers always interface and engage and interact with each other. When that begins to happen, they create an ecosystem that facilitates seamless public service delivery. And again, India has emerged as quite a leader in the space of e-governance among developing nations across the world. And thinking about DPIs from a public service delivery standpoint, a metaphor that is often used is that DPIs are like a digital railroad that help reach citizens more effectively. That's the way we need to think about this. Now, the magic unleashed when these three layers operate together has three very well-defined effects. First, it promotes public and private innovation by allowing the businesses and governments to develop novel applications and services on top of these DPI layers. All right, so it unleashes this innovation on an unprecedented scale. And you just have to think about the sheer number of applications, websites, mobile apps that you use, which actually make use of your Aadhaar number and UPI payment systems. That gives you an idea of the scale of this achievement. Second, it enables the creation of open networks on a scale that has never been seen before anywhere in the world. So India is now developing open networks for credit. We have something called the Open Credit Enablement Network, or OCEN. The idea here is that it brings MSMEs, small businesses, it links them up with potential lenders. All right, so for the first time ever, these small companies which may not have found it easy to get credit or to take loans are being able to link up directly with potential lenders and have access to credit. So that gives the MSME sector a big boost, as you can imagine. You also have, well, open networks in operation in the field of e-commerce. So we have something called the ONDC, or the Open Network for Digital Commerce. And open networks are also at the basis of the new Unified Health Identifier, which is basically an Aadhaar identity for the healthcare system. And this is at the core of our Ayushman Bharat digital mission today, right? The third big effect is that network effects begin to kick in when these layers begin to operate in tandem. And what this means is, when value is perceived in a platform or a service, more people flock to it. And the more people that are drawn to a platform or service, the more its value increases. So what happens is a kind of self-perpetuating virtuous cycle. And that increases the number of people using a service and, of course, the value that it generates. And this is evident from the fact that, if you consider Aadhaar, today more than 99.9% of the country's adult population is actually an Aadhaar holder. All of them have Aadhaar cards. UPI has been a runaway success. So in 2022 alone, India had 70 billion digital payments made in the course of the year, and a large proportion of this was actually using UPI. On a daily basis, we average 280 million digital payments. Again, largely because of the success of UPI and the way people have been attracted to it. So all of this has a very strong impact on the SDGs and our efforts to try and meet the Sustainable Development Goals. Aadhaar, if you remember, one of the original intentions of Aadhaar was to enable the direct transfer of benefits, cash subsidies to the poor and the needy. So right from the beginning, Aadhaar has had a very strong pro-poor orientation. And this is directly in line with goal 1 of the SDGs, which is to remove poverty in all its forms everywhere. So Aadhaar has had a very strong effect on strengthening social protection systems, achieving the coverage of the poor, ensuring access to basic services, and of course, improving the targeting and cost effectiveness of payments. One of our lead speakers talked a little about the importance of gender equality. And Aadhaar again has played a strong role in closing the gender gap in finance through these Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana accounts. All right, Aadhaar, as you know, is one of the key elements in the much talked about JAM Trinity, Jan Dhan, Aadhaar and mobile. And this has made financial inclusion a reality across India once again on an unprecedented scale. And far more women have access to funds, to access to bank accounts than ever before as a result of these systems. Just to give you another number, India crossed 472 million Jan Dhan accounts in October last year. And again, this is a feat that has never been replicated anywhere else in the world through any other financial inclusion scheme. There are lots of other benefits that Aadhaar has had when you think about it from a DPI angle. One of the lesser known uses of Aadhaar is the fact that it is used to transfer scholarships and stipends to students, all right, especially to needy students across the world, across India, I mean. And in doing so, it is strengthening educational outcomes, which is goal 4 of the SDGs. And of course, at a broader level, it is helping strengthen public institutions in many ways, okay, by eliminating ghost workers, by cleaning up voter registries. This is goal 16 of the SDGs, which talks about stronger, better institutions, public institutions. The UPI has been another outstanding success story from India, and the Niti Aayog rightly refers to UPI as a jewel among Indian fintech innovations. Ever since it was established in 2017, we've seen a year-on-year doubling of the volume of transactions of the UPI. And today it is really, by quite a margin, the biggest digital payment system of its kind in the world. And one of the SDGs talks about domestic institutions expanding access to financial services for all, and thus promoting economic growth. That is exactly what the UPI does. I also talked a little about these open networks, the Open Credit Enablement Network. This is, helping small-scale industrial and other enterprises to access financial services and affordable credit. This is goal 9.3, and so on. Now, these have been some excellent outcomes, and these would appear to point towards a very bright and optimistic future for DPIs. But in the digital world, there is always a risk that platforms and services might succumb to monopolization, authoritarianism, and digital colonization. Now, to ensure that this doesn't happen to DPIs anywhere, including in India, there needs to be at all times a very strong jugalbandi between public policy and public technology. That is, we need techno-legal frameworks to achieve policy objectives through public tech design. For example, India's DEPA offers technological tools for people to invoke the various privacy-related rights made available to them. Following India's successful experiments, many of these things that I just talked about, there is a desire across the world to replicate them, of course. And there are 3 potential models to choose from. First, of course, you have the India way, which is DPIs as I have described them. But then that's not the only way, right? You also have other ways in which you can mediate the flow of people, information, and money. You have a new Web3 model that has come in, and there is also a certain school of thought that perhaps big tech, private firms, ought to be responsible for laying out digital infrastructures. But of these three, you will be pleased to know that DPI has clearly emerged as the most feasible model because of its low cost, interoperability and scalable design, and because of the inbuilt safeguards that it has against monopolies and digital colonization. So India has made a conscious effort through all these platforms to try and build open democratic principles through the use of open source technology, open APIs into the design of these platforms. Now, if the construction of DPIs is to become a worldwide movement, there are three priorities that we need to address, and the G20 is truly a very useful, relevant, and really an excellent platform to try and do this through. First, there is a need for more open sharing knowledge platforms managed by DPI steward institutions, and this would help build trust and confidence in the idea of DPIs across the world. For instance, India has created something called the MOSIP, which stands for Modular Open Source Identity Platform. And this is really a way for providing tools to other countries to build their own Aadhaar-like systems, digital identity systems. So do go to the MOSIP website. It actually shows you in real time how many countries and people have begun using these systems, using India's tools. And 9 nations till date have formally signed up for the tools provided by MOSIP. And today more than 80 million people across the world are actually use these tools designed and conceived of by India. What's important is that there are transparent steward institutions running platforms of this kind. So MOSIP, for example, is administered by the IIIT Bangalore, Indian Institute of Information Technology. And the fact that you have an independent public university autonomously managing this platform has been crucial to the success of MOSIP. All right. And of course, at a broader level, the more of these open knowledge sharing platforms that you have, which the world can access, this is really an example of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam in practice. The principle of one earth, one family, and one future being put into action in a concrete way. Second, at the G20, India could lead a multilateral dialogue, or at least initiate one, about the need to develop global technological standards. Now, if standards originating from developed and advanced countries were to be foisted or imposed wholesale onto developing ones, then, there would simply be extreme dependence on established tech players. This would lead to precisely the kind of digital colonization that we want to avoid. Right? So India should actually be leading this conversation about how to prevent this. Another risk if this were to happen is, of course, big tech players would likely converge. The wolf is always at the door. And they would try and engage in regulatory arbitrage to try and concentrate their power. So India needs to lead this conversation about developing global tech standards. And finally, there is a need for sustainable financing models for DPIs. In India, it's been fairly straightforward. The government has funded our digital public infrastructures and administered them. But this is not necessarily the case in other parts of the world. In a lot of developing countries, philanthropic institutions play a large role in establishing these DPIs. And such models always run the risk of becoming a tool of philanthropic competition and positioning. All right. Again, there is a risk if the private sector entirely takes on the role of establishing these DPIs. Once again, this might lead to the kinds of monopolies that we want to avoid. So these are some of the core issues around DPIs that India, as president of the G20, would do well to bring to the fore and start a dialogue around. And it's when these issues are addressed this year and in the years ahead that I think our efforts to move towards a common and more inclusive digital future will reach fruition. Thank you very much.
Moving on from all the UPI transactions and the Aadhaar technologies being spoken of in India to taking the stage to a more international level, I would now like to request Ambassador Sujan Chinoy, Chair T20 and DG MP IDSA, to kindly share his thoughts on reformed multilateralism, transforming global institutions and frameworks. Over to you, sir.
Namaskar. Good afternoon to all of you. Very happy to be back at Gujarat University But let me begin by firstly thanking Professor Himanshu Pandya, the Vice Chancellor of Gujarat University, for agreeing to my proposal to organize a joint event, a tandem between the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defence Studies and Analysis and Gujarat University, and to invite others as well to join, to work with us for this event. For that, I thank my good friend, Mr. Divyesh Radia, the President of the Ahmedabad Management Association. And since we took very seriously this whole idea of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, we also invited the ORF to join us. For that, I thank Mr. Anirban Sarma, who has flown in all the way from Kolkata. And you represent the future of India, the youth. Large numbers that I see before us. So we obviously wanted Y20 also with us. That's Mr. Varun Javeri, who represents the Y20 today. But ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you not only as the DG of the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defence Studies and Analyses, but also as the THINK20 chair for India's G20 presidency. But more than that, I stand before you as an alumnus of this great university, Gujarat University. Many years ago, decades ago, in the late 70s, I came here in search of knowledge. I wanted to grow. I wanted to evolve. I wanted to prepare for the civil services. And I couldn't find a better place than Gujarat University. And knowledge is very important. If I look back in time and try and identify a place and a point of time in my life, I am drawn back to those 2 years from 1978 to 1980, when I walked in the same corridors as you do now, in search of knowledge. There is an ancient Sanskrit saying, Sahitya Sangeet Kala Vihin Sakshat Pashupuchya Vishanahin. When I came here in search of knowledge, I was not such a mature person. I was a very youthful person. And my journey towards that knowledge was in part completed by this great institution. For a man without knowledge, for a human being without knowledge, is virtually as unnatural as an animal is without a tail and horns. So it is the natural state of a human being to seek knowledge. For we are perhaps the only life form on earth that has been given this blessing to think beyond our own needs, to think about others. And that is also how India thinks when it speaks of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. But before I begin my address, let me tell you how important the G20 is to India, to this region, to our 1.4 billion people, and to the world. It is for the first time that India has taken on the presidency of the G20. It is also the very first time that 4 developing countries are the president of the G20 back to back, beginning with Indonesia last year, India this year, we have Brazil next year, and South Africa the year after. And it's also the very first time for any G20 event anywhere in the world for it to be a people's event. 1.4 billion people are now looking at the G20 with great expectation. They are being told about the G20. It's a mass movement. Where have you seen this in the rest of the world? Nowhere. For that we must thank the Prime Minister of India, Shri Narendra Modi, for actually making it possible to involve the people of India. And that is why we are here, this outreach event, to involve you, to involve every member of the community, the youth across India. There is a Sanskrit saying, Yatha ekena chakrena na rathasya gatir bhavat. Evam purush karena vina daivam na siddhyate. So what does that mean? Yatha ekena chakrena na rathasya gatir bhavat. Just as a chariot cannot move on one wheel, so also without effort, without joint effort, we cannot achieve our potential, our destiny. Yatha ekena chakrena rathasya gatir bhavat. Evam bina daivam, it is evam purush karen bina daivam na siddhyate. It is also the first time that 11 engagement groups have been appointed, have been formed to implement the G20. It's also for the first time in the history of the G20 that there is so much emphasis on the global south. I see sitting here before us many students from other parts of the world, the true meaning of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. I know that there will be presentations by students from Egypt and Indonesia. And that is because we in India believe that the world is one family, that we are one earth, one family, and that we have a common future. The 7 petals of the G20 logo represent the 7 continents, the 7 musical notes, which, when they merge with one another, truly result in music. And that is significant. It symbolizes our oneness as human beings. India speaks for all. As the Prime Minister has said, India speaks for the global south. Just a month and a half ago, the Prime Minister engaged 123 leaders from around the world. Presidents, prime ministers, foreign ministers, leaders of the delegation, to hear their views about the future. In a world which is fractured today, in a world which is greatly challenged. The G20 is also important because it comprises 85% of the global GDP, 75% of global trade, and 2/3 of global population. It is, as Prime Minister Modi has described it, it is meant to be action-oriented, decisive, and ambitious as far as India is concerned. Today, what happens in India has great impact on the world beyond our shores. So also what is happening in the world around us has a major impact on what happens in India. But this G20 event will also be very important in order to showcase our great culture. We are going to organize, and we've already begun to organize, more than 200 events around the country in more than 50 cities across 32 different segments, which really means that we will promote our culture, our cuisine. We will promote tourism. This is a great opportunity for renewal of infrastructure across the country. We will stimulate the local economies by promoting the notion of the concept of one district, one product. In many ways, therefore, it's a great opportunity. It is entirely fortuitous that it happens to be India's presidency at the very start of the Amrit Kal period, which has been described by the Prime Minister of India as this wonderful period between now and 2047, when India celebrates its centenary. India is expected to become a developed country. We have entered that golden period now. It is India that is going to provide the values and the ethics that are today so lacking in international affairs. Around the world, we can see a great shortage of values, a great shortage of ethics. The world does not simply need vaccines for pandemics. The world also needs vaccines for morality, a new moral compass. that only a country like India can give with its rich history and culture. The T20, my friends, is the Ideas Bank. It is one of the 11 engagement groups. It is also the Ideas Bank that is required to support the G20. Today, we take on the G20 presidency at a time when India has emerged as a resilient economy in the aftermath of the pandemic, in the aftermath of emerging tensions around the world, contradictions. It is India that is still a resilient economy, growing at 7% and expected to grow at 7% or more for the next decade and a half. As I mentioned before, we have entered that Amrit Kal period in which we must all join our hands, work together in order to realize this objective of making India a developed country. India has also emerged as an independent pole in international affairs. In a fractured world, it is India that has been given this great opportunity to share its civilizational ethos of peace and non-violence. Sarve Jana Sukhino Bhavantu. We believe in the happiness of all mankind. It is an opportunity for India to strike a new trajectory, not only for ourselves, but for the rest of the world. One in which we have a chance to demonstrate our ability through our value system to be a Vishwa Guru, through our focus on healthcare for humankind, to also be a Vishwa Vaidya, not just a Vishwa Guru. We are taking our vaccine Maitri to much deeper levels. And Arogya Maitri is now being spoken of between India and the rest of the world. So India as G20 presidency augurs well for a world which is today in the midst of what we call multiple crises. Multilateralism, as you have seen, is greatly weakened. Multilateral structures such as the United Nations, such as the WHO, such as the WTO, are not functioning as they were expected to. It is a fractured world, but it is not yet fragmented. And therein lies the hope that India's presidency can come in and give that healing touch. On the highway, on the gridlocked highway of international relations, it is India that can provide that respite, that wayside station where people can pull away from the traffic jams to be able to speak to each other in a friendly manner in the same room, to look for solutions. Even low-hanging fruit will do if we can reach that kind of consensus. The G20 is not a binding institution. Its recommendations are not binding. But therein lies that potential for us to discuss things freely, to seek solutions to these great problems that we face today. Virtually every aspect of globalization as we know it today is challenged. Whether it is trade, which is the key fulcrum of globalization today, whether it is technology, which enables societies to lead better lives and to aspire for better futures, whether it is capital, which is in great shortage today, with more than 75 countries facing debt distress, or whether it is global mobility of people. Everywhere globalization has been challenged. There is essentially a great disruption that has taken place, not only on account of the pandemic, but also on account of the war in Ukraine. Not only on account of the war in Ukraine, but also these rising tensions, major power contestation between the West, for instance, on the one hand, and other autocratic, authoritarian regimes on the other hand. And in this, the Indo-Pacific, the region in which we are located today, is very important. It will determine the future of the 21st century. It will be the fulcrum of the new equilibrium that we seek. The Asia-Pacific is a concept that many people refer to, but it is an outdated concept. It is a concept that was more suitable for the second half of the 20th century, when a Japan rose from the ashes of the Second World War and found a new lease of life as an economic power by accessing the great markets across the Pacific, in North America, particularly the United States of America, and then followed the Asian tigers such as Korea, such as Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, eventually even China accessed the same market of the United States of America to grow into the second largest economy in the world. But that was then. In the 21st century, this trend of spreading growth, prosperity and development is no longer located in a certain geography, no longer restricted to East Asia. It has spread to Southeast Asia, it has spread to South Asia, to countries like India and Bangladesh, which have also shown a capacity for high growth rates, but it has also spread all the way to the east coast of Africa. And between these two oceans, the geopolitical and geoeconomic space is interlinked. There is nothing that happens in the Indian Ocean that does not have an effect in the Pacific. And there is nothing that likewise happens in the Pacific Ocean that does not have an impact in the Indian Ocean. Within this, we see that the world today is divided. There is disruption across 6 core factors, which I'd like to describe as the 6 T's. The first is trade, which I mentioned earlier. But trade is fungible. It can recover. It has a momentum and life of its own. We have seen that despite the move towards decoupling by certain economies from certain others, it has been virtually impossible to decouple. India's trade with China has actually grown since 2020. It now stands at $135 billion. And our adverse balance of trade has grown even further. But that is also true of the trade between the United States of America and China. It's also true of trade between Japan and China. The point I'm trying to make is that trade is not easily controlled. Trade is something that happens due to the market forces, demand and supply. The private sector is involved. Entrepreneurs, small and medium enterprises are involved. But the tensions, the friction with regard to the second T, that technology, are real. As the world moves towards big data, towards artificial intelligence, towards new and emerging technologies, the consequences of which are still unpredictable, it is easier to engage in denial regimes through sanctions, through export controls, and that is happening today. The third T is that of territory. There are territorial disputes in the Indo-Pacific that are yet to be reconciled. Why just the Indo-Pacific? For the first time, after nearly 77 years, we see that Europe's security is once again challenged. In the war in Ukraine, there is a question mark about security in Europe. So territorial disputes are the third T. The fourth T is of terrorism. When people speak about geoeconomics, they forget about the need for peace and stability in societies. And terrorism continues to rear its ugly head, including cross-border terrorism, in India's case. The fourth is the T of tenets, narratives, systems of economic, social, cultural development, governance, the clash of narratives about whose system is superior. And this is something that we live with today. But this is also a story that's greatly complicated as a result of mass circulation of information, misinformation, disinformation, propaganda. And as a result of all this, there is the sixth T, trust, or the lack of it, which is greatly challenged. And it is India's G20 presidency which will seek to address these frictions in a fragmented world, a fractured world, through its policy of inclusive consultations, through its motto of one earth, one family, one future, and by actually seeking results. Economic recovery, climate change, especially its effect on low-income countries, island countries, these are the great challenges of today. And most developing countries today are being given binary choices, either this or that. Hence, it is under India's G20 presidency that we would seek to offer more choices to the developing world. After all, the G20 is the largest representative grouping in the world. It includes 19 of the largest economies and also one large economic union, the European Union. It has the G7 in it. The developing countries are also represented through groups such as BRICS, for instance, all within the G20. Even the quadrilateral security dialogue members are involved in the G20. Major powers everywhere are suspect today because of the trust factor, the lack of trust. And it is countries like India that can actually work in tandem with other powers like Indonesia, like Brazil, like Australia, like Japan, to offer more choice to developing countries. We can engage with others in what we call bilateral, trilateral, plurilateral structures in order to take this narrative forward. All 20 don't have to agree on everything. Within that room, we can and must find new friends to work together. It is also a very fortunate development that as India takes on its responsibilities as G20 president, Japan is the president of the G7. And between India and Japan, there is a very close and deep friendship, a strategic partnership. And we can together convince the others. Japan can act as a voice with regard to the G7, we can act as a voice with regard to the developing countries to see how we can bring people together. Within the T20, as you are aware, based on the G20's priorities, India's priorities, we have several task forces. The first task force 1, focuses on macroeconomics, on trade, on how to revive trade, how to make trade more transparent, how to bring down tariffs, how to enable exports to grow. And this is something that will also look at supply chains. Supply chains that are today increasingly divided into critical and non-critical supply chains. Supply chains that are subject to a securitized vision. Economics today is being trumped by security considerations for the first time in the history of globalization. And this is an increasing phenomenon. This trend is likely to continue. The second task force looks at a common digital future on which Mr. Anirban Sarma just gave you several ideas. But India's success in JAM, that is Jan Dhan, Aadhaar, and the mobile phone applications, India's success in the unified payments interface, UPI, this is something that we can share with the rest of the world. Particularly, we can share it with developing countries through appropriate safeguards, through appropriate capacity building programs. The most important, however, in my view, is the work of Task Force 3, which looks at lifestyle for environment. How many of you in this hall have heard of LIFE? And how many of you know that it is a very important concept that was proposed by none other than the Prime Minister of India, Shri Narendra Modi, at COP26. And it is an idea that is very simple but has very profound implications. And the simple concept here is that if we have to protect our environment and if we have to safeguard, our future, the future of our youth and future generations, each one of us has to act responsibly when it comes to the environment. The idea is to create millions and billions of pro-planet people who through their individual actions will have a very major impact on societies, and societies will have an impact on nations, and nations will have an impact on the global community. And this is to be done with values and ethics, India's great civilizational ethos driving us forward. For all Indians are taught from birth to respect the environment. I recall Prime Minister Modi stating in one of his earlier speeches that many Indians, the first thing they do when they wake up is to bow before Mother Earth and to respect Mother Earth for all its bounties and blessings. Task Force 4 is to look at clean energy and green transition. For if we have to prevent this disastrous global warming, if we have to cap, rise in global temperatures to 1.5%, 1.5 degrees or keep it below 2 degrees, we will have to do something dramatic like move towards clean energy. And India has done this by, announcing the Panchamrit, as you know. Prime Minister Modi announced Panchamrit unilaterally. As a responsible power, India has taken on those responsibilities to move towards 50% generation of our electricity by 2030 coming from clean energy, reducing our, carbon emissions, reducing the role of fossil fuels, reducing, the whole impact on the environment. And our National Hydrogen Mission, with about 20,000 crores of rupees, that's about $2.4 billion committed to that program, is going to help us move into a better future. Task Force 5 looks at global financial order, review of quota-based special drawing rights. Now you're all aware that the World Bank and the IMF, like the United Nations, are treaty-based organizations. This entire structure, this panoply of the United Nations, the UN Security Council, the World Bank, the IMF, these are structures created at the end of the Second World War for a certain period by the victors of the Second World War. They are not suitable for today's, economy. They are not well suited to provide answers to the challenges that humankind faces today. They require reform, drastic reforms. At the end of the Second World War, the concept was, to the victor go the spoils. The UN Security Council was created in 1945 with 5 permanent members. They have a veto power over everything. It was not nuclear weapons that allowed certain powers to become permanent members of the UN Security Council. In fact, in 1945, there was only one power that had nuclear weapons. That was the United States of America. In fact, countries sought nuclear weapons as a result of the privileged status they had in the UN Security Council as permanent members. To my mind, that is a kind of abuse of a privileged position that they had. We have seen how the League of Nations at the end of the First World War was not successful in keeping peace and stability. You all may have heard of the Treaty of Versailles that was attempted in 1919. It failed. After the Great War, it failed to bring about any permanent structure for peace and stability. In 1920, the League of Nations was formed, but it was not supported by the United States of America. And Japan and Germany were very reluctant participants. Their aims and objectives were not fulfilled by the League of Nations. And the 1930s saw either a walkout by many of these great powers that were militarizing, or they were removed. Japan left in 1933 after moving into Manchuria. Germany left a couple of years later after interfering in the Spanish Civil War. Italy left a year later, around 1936 or 37, after interfering in Abyssinia in Africa. And the Soviet Union was removed in 1939 after only 5 years of its membership. So we are looking at the possibility of the United Nations and the UN Security Council as it exists today meeting the same fate in the future if we do not reform it. There is no guarantee that it will last this 21st century, for the balance of power has shifted. The balance of power, the engines of global growth are no longer where they were in 1945. This is a new world, a world in which countries like India have emerged as very strong and independent poles. The World Bank and the IMF also require great reform. The IMF loan system is still based on a very outdated quota system of special drawing rights. I am not an economist, and when I tried to understand this concept, it was very bizarre. It said that in 1945 and in subsequent years, the quota system was evolved based on the relative contribution of a country's economy in the global economy. But when you look at the quota system today, you find that a relatively declined Britain, UK, despite contributing only 4.5% to the global economy, still has quota rights that are SDRs that are 6.4%. And India, which contributes 3.25% of the global economy, has SDRs around 2.75%. So there is a great deal of discrimination there. And add to it, in the aftermath of the COVID pandemic, when there are so many countries under debt distress, there is also something called a surcharge being levied by the IMF. Roughly $4 billion have been levied on countries that borrowed from the IMF by way of surcharge. And reforms have come in quite infrequently. In 2008, I recall that the voting rights were increased from, basic voting rights were increased in the IMF from 250 to 750. And there were some further changes made at the 14th review of the SDR and quota system. But this is not adequate to meet the challenges of the 21st century. Task Force 6 deals with SDGs, and of the 17 SDGs, I think the most important one is food security today. As the war in Ukraine has shown us, the shortages of food, fuel, and fertilizer, there are many countries in the world that are unable today to feed their own people. And traditional exporters are no longer able to export because of war and strife. Wheat, for example, from Ukraine and Russia. Countries like India have actually helped, alongside others like Turkey, to broker some of these arrangements that allowed evacuation of wheat from Europe to those parts that need them. And India, as a very large producer of wheat, I think the third largest producer of wheat in the world is India. But India is also the largest producer of millets. 41% of all millets in the world are produced by India. And so it is time for India to actually form an alliance during the G20 presidency of major millet producers, sharing best practices, technology and financing for the production of millets, to popularize millets, to also export millets to those that need them. The last task force, Task Force 7, is about reform, multilateralism, reform of the United Nations itself. The last time that the United Nations Security Council was reformed was the only time that it was reformed, and that was in the 1960s. When the UN was formed in 1945, there were only 51 members. And the UN Security Council had 11 members, 5 permanent and 6 non-permanent. The only time this figure changed was in 1965, when the non-permanent category was increased from 6 to 10, bringing the total number to 15. It does not reflect the world that exists today. There are many diminished powers still sitting in the United Nations Security Council. Some sit there because they have thousands of nuclear weapons, not necessarily large economies. So it is time that the world looked at reform of this international system. Ladies and gentlemen, today I think it is extremely fortuitous that India's G20 presidency coincides with its emergence as one of the world's largest economies. India is today the 5th largest economy in the world and set to emerge as among the top 2 or 3 in the not too distant future during the Amrit Kal period. Our Atmanirbhar Bharat policy is not autarkic. It is not meant to take us to some medieval age where we deglobalize. It is very different from an autarkic policy or a closed door policy. Self-reliance that Atmanirbhar Bharat will give us is very different from self-sufficiency. Self-reliance only means that we will equip ourselves to be more competitive, to be better able to engage partners around the world for mutual benefit. We also are driven by our Vedanta teachings. Our outlook is driven by the Vedanta teachings of the Atman as we represent it, the billions of souls that exist, and the Brahman concept of Advaitya, where all the Atman come together to merge with the Brahman. The idea here is that we are, at the end of the day, one family and we have one future. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. That's a very important concept. It's also the concept that drives India's initiatives like One Sun, One World, One Grid, which is the energy equivalent of that spiritual oneness that we come together. So with these few words, ladies and gentlemen, let me thank you all. Let me once again wish you all the very best. I'm very grateful to you all for acknowledging our presence here and receiving us with such warmth and friendship. It's always good to be back in my alma mater, Gujarat University. Namaskar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your remarks. And may I take the liberty to add that after what you've addressed us, your content might add another T, which is discussions over tea itself, chai pe charcha, because sir has given us so much to discuss, things that we relate to, things that so many of us would like to be addressed. And it's not only echoing the sentiments of those inside of this hall today, but perhaps many others who are sitting outside of this in India and many other developing countries. With those words, I would now like to call upon Mr. Varun Jhaveri, Advisor Youth 20, who will be giving his remarks on green transition for reimagining the global financial order, a youth perspective. Floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. Namaste, everyone. Kem cho, Gujarat College? હું બી ગુજરાતી છું, so can understand the sentiment. Well, sir, it is very difficult, to follow as a speaker after such remarkable address by Ambassador Sujoy. When he was speaking, I, as a young learner, also learned so many things. Such a sweet moment, and then when he completed, I realized I still have to speak. And then realize that there are so many points that have already been covered, so it's such a bittersweet moment for me to follow after Ambassador Sujoy. But on a strict note, thank you T20 Secretariat, thank you Ambassador Chinoy for having me here. Thank you VC Himanshu Pandya ji, the AMA President Divyesh Radia ji, a fellow speaker and senior fellow at ORF, Anirban Sarmaji, for a brilliant address on the public digital infrastructure and the public digital goods. The topic that I will be speaking on, it's a bit layered, it's a bit complex, and I would probably what I will do is that I will try to simplify it a bit and try to share some of my observations, share some of my experiences, and probably use this T20 platform as a way to probably discuss a few ideas that can be taken forward. So as Anandita mentioned, the topic that I want to share some of my remarks is how the green transition can lead to a reimagination of a global financial order. As Ambassador Chinoy was mentioning, that when we talk about the global financial order per se, we generally think about the Bretton Woods institutions, which are primarily the World Banks and the IMF, expanding the definition and probably even taking it up to the global financial system. Along with the World Bank and IMF, I also want to probably start thinking about all the other development financial institutions, such as the Asian Development Bank, the AIIB, the African Investment Bank, and also the central banks, especially of the G20 countries, other institutional investors, primarily all the different forces which are present in a market. So a market typically will have a consumer, it will have an institutional investor, it will have a retail investor, it will have different corporations. So in all, the frame that I'm looking at in terms of the global financial order is overall the global financial system per se, and how sustainability and a focus on green transition will lead to reimagination of their role. So if you actually look back, and if we go back just before 3 to 4 years, we will see that how the entire global financial system or the order has seen a lot of vulnerabilities, especially starting from the COVID-19 pandemic, and then currently when we look at the the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict, we can see that a lot of countries, they're still emerging out of the COVID-19 pandemic, or for that matter most of the countries. We saw how the supply chain, they became extremely vulnerable. Earlier when food security used to be discussed, and as Ambassador was also speaking, that how the food security is probably one of the most important SDGs. I still remember in 2015 when the SDGs were passed, food security was thought about one of the topic, but pandemic has made it pretty evident that the food security and the entire supply chain, it can possess severe threat because our supply chains are not that resilient. So if you look at what has happened in this last 3 to 4 years, and if you look at the situation right now of the entire global financial system, and when we look at the global economic outlook, we can see that most of the countries, they are, and including a lot of G20 countries, they are facing high inflation. Some of them actually do have inflation in the double digits, some of the big economies for that matter. The second big part is that if you look at the unemployment, because this is a sort of a big factor when it comes to a lot of millions of young citizens, what has happened is that the pandemic and the ongoing crisis has actually made young people extremely vulnerable. I will just give you a number. Recently, the ILO, the International Labour Organization, it came up with a report that young people are actually 3x more vulnerable to unemployment as compared to the adults, which makes the entire instability in the global financial system extremely vulnerable for the young people. At the same time, if we look at the economic outlook, the prediction which was supposed to be that the global economy will be growing with a 3.5, higher of 3.6%, is currently only growing by 2.2 to 2.3%. So overall, if we look at it, the status quo of the global financial system, that itself has faced a very big threat. And of course, there were black swan events which happened, but the idea is that how can we make the entire global financial order and the system much more future-proof? At the same time, when we talk about this particular, last 3 to 4 years, and, talking about some of the green shoots that are happening, and probably, I will take you 1 decade back about what are some of the interesting things that has also happened. Probably, something which was not of a lot of focus, but it has now started getting a lot of focus, is that in the last one decade, if you look at the consumption of the renewable energy, it has, for again, a lot of countries, it has increased by 3-digit increase. So, especially for the Asian countries, I was looking at some of the data, the consumption, especially the energy generation that is happening through renewable resources, it has increased by almost 500% in the last one decade. A very big sort of an example of that is India. India, what it had promised, the 2030 renewable targets, we actually met those particular targets way before those particular time frame, actually by a gap of 9 years. So the targets that we were supposed to accomplish in 2030, we actually met those targets, late 2021, early 2022. The second thing that I think was very interesting is that there is a huge sort of a increase in the transactions that are happening in the carbon trading market itself. So, one sort of a big construct, which was again, sort of started by the global community, was how can we have this type of, voluntary carbon trading, that if there are, particular set of industries which are emitting emissions, how can they actually voluntarily buy the carbon trading? So if you look at the carbon trading market, it has evolved very significantly. So currently it is in hundreds of billions. 4 to 5 years down the line, there are predictions that it will be crossing thousands of billions, which means that there is more and more interest that is happening in the carbon trading market. More and more players, more and more corporations, more and more countries actually want to start participating in the carbon trading market. As a matter of fact, India in the last year, somewhere in the November, it passed a legislation which said that India would be a country which would be establishing a domestic carbon trading market for the domestic corporation, so that the entire mobility of carbon credit can actually happen within the country. At the same time, the interesting part is that now there are 70 plus countries across the world which has actually pledged carbon zero, and India is one of them. As Ambassador was also mentioning, that new initiatives such as the green hydrogen and the ethanol based fuel, those are some of the things that countries have now started pushing. Same time, 1,000 plus cities are now participating in something called Race to Zero, which is again a carbon zero movement. As a matter of fact, what is very interesting, because all of us are also sitting in Gujarat, not only cities, India has also started mobilizing villages to adopt the clean energy movement. Modera, the Surya Mandir village, it became the first village in the entire country to become the solar power village. So that is a big sort of a matter of achievement for the state as well as the country. And finally, if we look at the overall discourse on sustainability itself, there's a lot of awareness that has happened, especially in the last 7 to 8 years. People have now started understanding what is organic farming. People have now started understanding, what are green pledges. Corporations have now started putting that, we procure everything green. And at the same time, big country level initiatives such as, the LIFE initiatives, which was announced by our Honorable Prime Minister, those are some of the initiatives that have started emerging at a countrywide level. So these are some of the things that are happening. So at one end, you have a very vulnerable global financial system, that you have seen what has happened in the last 3 to 4 years. And at the second hand, you have all this type of green shoot sustainability initiatives that we have seen in the last 1 decade. Now, the idea is that even when we look at, the current particular status quo, and this is something that, the G20 and India and, all different institutional players have been saying for a long time, that the sustainability initiative, this is the time when we need to start really accelerating. What we are doing is good, but probably that is not enough. And that brings me to the discussion that how can sustainability as a theme start getting integrated in the global financial order? How do we put money on the things that we are talking? Because at the end of the day, if it is just talk and there is no money which is going to get involved, we are not going to see any sort of an impact. If it is going to be the same old status quo global financial order, the same calculations based on the only economic return, we are not going to see sustainability getting mainstream. And that is the reason why this particular topic, why this interlinkage is extremely critical. And for the same, I thought that there would be, some of the observations, some of the deliberation that I would share, especially from a youth perspective, that I think are very important, because finally today's generation, the young people, you and me, We are the ones who have to, live in this particular world for the next 30, 40, 50 years. And that's why what happens right now is something that is going to matter a lot. So some of the observations that I think are relevant. First is, especially when we look at the global financial systems, we will see that, when we are, let's say when we are taking a loan, or when, there is a sort of an impact evaluation, or when there is, any particular credit which has been given, the only consideration that generally happens is that what is the type of rate of interest? What is the type of internal rate of return, the IRR? The first idea that needs to start piloting is that along with the economic IRR, how are we blending the sustainability impact? How do we blend the environmental and the sustainability impact with the internal rate of return? Can the banks, especially the global banks, can they choose to fund projects which have a better blended ratio as compared to the only IRR? This is going to make a sort of a significant impact. I know few banks are already doing that, but this needs to be even replicated at the central banks and at the domestic banks level. That can we start prioritizing? In India, we do have something called as a priority sector lending that RBI mandates every particular domestic bank to do. Banks need to give loans for healthcare, education, basic infrastructure development. Can we have certain guidelines, across the G20 countries, which also ask the central banks to, start looking for sustainability as an impact? The second part, which is a critical part, is that if you look at the 18th and 19th century, that was the era of industrial revolution. Machines came in, efficiency got better. It was much easier to do, manufacturing and production. If you look at the 20th century, we would say, that was an era of digital revolution. But if you look at this 21st century where we are sitting right now, I'm pretty confident that in the next 5 to 7 years, we will start seeing that this is an era of green transition. And when we talk about the green transition, one of the most important thing is how, as young people, we are going to skill ourselves. Back before a couple of days we had a Y20 consultation, and one of the big issue that we were discussing was how can we start putting focus on green skilling? Right from the time that a product is manufactured to the part that it is designed, it is manufactured, it is packed, till the time it is shipped, end-to-end logistics, to the time it is, done with the consumption, and then finally it is disposed. Every stage across every sector has some sort of a sustainable carbon impact. And how, as young people, are we going to equip ourselves to get involved in these different stages? Just like, if you look at the digital revolution, every, engineering colleges, a lot of students, they learn coding, they learn how to work with the machines. The idea is that as young people, and this is something probably that, needs to be taken forward, is that as G20, how can we come up with a common skilling framework for green opportunities? How are we preparing our young people to take up this particular jobs and make an impact there? The third thing that I think, again, India has done a terrific job is with regard to entrepreneurship. If you look at the current entrepreneurship climate, India has the third highest number of startups across the world. Now, how do we marry the idea of entrepreneurship with sustainability? I think that is going to be one big sort of a blue sky that India can actually pioneer and India can lead. So the idea is that how can we promote entrepreneurship in such type of sustainability spaces? One of the simple solution when we look at the global financial order is that can we have more institutional investors pledging a certain amount of their particular funds to such type of startups or such type of entrepreneurship ventures? Can we have dedicated venture capital funds which are going to focus on funding these young people for such type of sustainability drives? So, skill development and entrepreneurship, along with that, that's going to be a big sort of a focus area for young people to actually develop their skill set in the green economy. At the same time, some of the softer financial nudges, especially on the innovative financing part. I remember when I used to work at Ayushman Bharat, one of the things that we had done was make a blended financing facility for healthcare innovation. Now, how it used to blend is that it used to give out a 20 lakh or a 30 lakh grant to a healthcare startup as a guarantee against a particular loan that they would be getting. So can we start blending such type of innovative financing mechanisms? Can the big institutional investors or, whether it is, the government funds, then can they come and start giving some of the softer things like, I will give you a bank guarantee, or I will give you a first stop loss guarantee. So the idea is that how do we blend this and come with really innovative ideas in the existing financing mechanism to give a push to sustainability. Couple of big issues that I feel is that the current taxonomy which is there, the current nomenclature which is there, if I ask what is green to someone in India versus if I ask what is green to someone in Indonesia versus if I ask someone what is green in Brazil, everyone has a different answer. And at the same time, how do I measure how much is green? Again, everyone has a different answer. You know, for a large, big corporation which has a turnover in billions, you know, just putting up a dustbin does not mean that it has greened its place. So the idea is that how can we have a standard nomenclature of what is green, how much is green, how to make it more green. And I think this is the G20 and the T20 is the right platform to actually do that. A couple of other things is when we are trying to do impact measurement, again, this is a very gray area. And again, this is an idea that probably can be taken at the T20 and the G20 level, is that how can we standardize the impact measurement? You know, it should not be that someone is coming with a number that this is a 30% impact versus someone is saying that this is a 35% impact. So how do we standardize those particular processes? Finally, you know, last point with regard to that there is a huge need to start celebrating sustainability heroes. You know, currently, most of the heroes that we celebrate, you know, they are the economic tycoons, they are the billionaires and the trillionaires, you know, someone bought this, someone acquired this. But I feel that the G20 level, especially young people who are actually working at a ground level, who are actually, you know, on the streets doing some very impactful work, they need to be recognized, they need to be identified, and they need to be celebrated at the G20 level. I feel that this particular exercise will inspire millions of young people across the G20 countries and across the world. With this, I genuinely feel that, you know, T20 as a platform which celebrates the spirit of different ideas, which celebrates the spirit of discussion, I feel that this would be some of the ideas that would be taken forward by the T20 and will be discussed with other T20 member countries. And I strongly feel that as a young Indian citizen, the India's G20 presidency would be remembered in history as a turning point when the green transition started taking place and when the financial system started becoming better. Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you, Mr. Javeri, for making us realize that India's presidency of the G20 is not only an opportunity, but also a big responsibility for us to bring about a change, a green and sustainable change, which helps each and every one of us for today and tomorrow. Now, I would like to move into the second segment of our event, which is the students' presentations. Each student will be making a presentation of 5 minutes each. I would request them to kindly stick to their time limits. With this, I would like to call upon the first student, Mr. Yamik Upadhyay. He will be presenting on macroeconomics, trade and livelihoods, policy coherence, and international coordination. Mr. Yamik.
Good evening, respected dignitaries and everyone present over here. My today's topic of discussion is about macroeconomics, trade, and livelihoods. I am Yamik Upadhyay. Macroeconomic policy involves fundamental trade-offs and affects different groups differently. In the current macroeconomic scenario, the complications are Russia-Ukraine war, inflation, global food and energy shortages, unwinding asset bubbles, debt crisis, and adverse impact of COVID-19 related shutdowns and supply chain bottlenecks may be the most serious crisis of them all. Not least because central banks can't print gasoline and wheat. All of these have led to significant tweaks in monetary, trade, fiscal, and investment policies across the world to keep employment and livelihoods afloat. All the above disruptions have eventually led to the increase in inflation. And as the inflation have increased, the world banks and the central agencies around the world have now started to increase the rates. So what is happening currently is the banks around the world are increasing the rates in order to combat the inflation. So because of that, corporates are facing problems. The reason is their interest costs have shot up. The interest burden is too much. And because of that, in order to increase the profitability, they are laying off massive people. And because of that, everywhere it is in the headlines that Facebook has laid off 10,000 people, Amazon is going to lay off 18,000 people, and this has led to massive layoffs. And the youth of the world is being impacted because of all of them. So despite of economists thinking about combating inflation, fighting out all those macroeconomic factors, ultimately we are on the same level, and ultimately at last, despite of increasing the inflation, the rates, bank rates, inflation is still above the projected trajectory. It's still above the tolerance band of all the banks across the world. So such is the challenges currently going on at the world level, at the macro level, and such are the these are the extraordinary times, we can say that. Additionally, there needs to be better international coordination to combat macroeconomic complications. Russia-Ukraine war have affected commodity prices tremendously. We can see that commodity prices have shot up like anything. Supply chains have been disrupted. The only way right now is to stop the war and to resolve the issues diplomatically. However, there are certain so-called developed nations of the world which are, as usual, funding the war as per their old habit and making the world suffer. In their own report, US Defense have admitted that they have spent more than 5 lakh crore INR in funding Ukraine by buying weapons, ammunitions, giving stipends and salaries to army. So now we all know that who is behind everything. So rather than solving things diplomatically, most advanced nations are fueling the war, and we, the world's citizens, are feeling the heat of the same. Corporates are getting bankrupt, inflation is eating out people, all at the cost of a few developed nations. So what is the way out now? COVID was something which was unexpected, but can't we avoid a war? Can't we make policies where we can give employment to the people who need it the most, rather than investing trillions of dollars around the world on defense? Can't we function as a one world, a world of peace, helping our economies to sustain, developing different sources of supply, increasing investments, contributing towards economic growth and development, helping out economies which are struggling, building a stronger international coordination, generating employment and maintaining livelihood across the world, and develop monetary policies that can strike a balance to maintain macroeconomic imbalances. Looks like a fairy tale, but it is possible. We need to understand that we are more alike than different. Feeling of superiority by so-called developed nations needs to be sacrificed for the sake of humanity. The world is a global economy which is united by hearts, divided by boundaries. Aligning our thought process in synchronization with the development of the world as a whole will solve most of our problems. We just need to remember one thing, that united we stand and divided we fall. The world is just one economy. We need to understand that all of us can solve any sort of problem if we are together. But we cannot solve problems if we feel that I am right or you are right. It's us which needs to be paved the way towards the development of the world. With this, I would like to end my speech. Thank you so much for listening to me patiently.
Thank you very much, Mr. Upadhyay. I would now like to call upon Mr. Ronak Tijoriwala, who will share his views on life, resilience, and values for well-being.
Thank you. Good evening to everyone. Good evening to the dais members and everyone present over here. I'm Ronak Tajoriwala, given the opportunity to present on the topic of life, resilience, and values of well-being. Life, the idea that Chinoy sir actually told us and asked many of us that if we know about it, the lifestyle for environment is a full form that was introduced by our Prime Minister Narendra Modi at United Nations Climate Change Conference of Parties, COP26, focuses on bringing a change in individual and societal behavior with respect to sustainable consumption and production. With this vision that we have been presented, I thought, as citizens, not of a country, but of the world, are we fully aware of the responsibilities that we are expected to take up to carry this vision ahead? As sir also mentioned, a new moral compass. That is what I think I would be touching upon a little bit. I would like to talk about individual growth and well-being, sustainable consumption and production, as they are in today's world some of the most important aspects of development, which depends on achieving long-term economic peace and growth. These actions, I think, should be consistently followed by environmental and social responsibilities that would then be followed by needs. The government policies in this area focus on reducing the environmental impacts of unsustainable industrial production and its practices. But are they enough? Do you think? Are they? I don't think so. Promoting sustainable consumption with individual responsibilities is equally important to limit their negative environmental and social impacts, as well as to provide markets for sustainable behavior and products. An individual's definition, as per what I think, of being sustainable should refer to both the environmental and social characteristics of both producing and consuming. The government tools and instruments that are present and are in place to encourage sustainable consumption are only one phase of the whole process. The other depends on us, the citizens. The recent approaches by the government towards understanding consumer groups that are based on understanding social and economic behavior are focusing on creating this second phase. These mixtures of different instruments that are focused on sustainable living tend to be effective in promoting other aspects of environmental and social concerns and solutions as well. With the umbrella of life and well-being and resilience being very wide and the time being less, I'd like to mention a few aspects of which we could focus on if we as citizens first take up the responsibility of being sustainable in our current behavior before the green wave starts. Those few to mention would be increased integrity and ethics in individuals that would already be in us when the green movement would start. The overall economic growth in institutions, I think that would be eventually followed if every individual over here understands their responsibility towards the environment, to its own nation, to their own self, I would say. And lastly, it would go towards the sustainable, disaster-resilient infrastructures and measures that would also get more focus. As Varun sir said, banks that are granting loans just dependent on interest rates, if they focus more on environment-based or what part of their investment is focusing on environment or on healing it or somehow helping it, I think the last point of resilient infrastructures and disasters would
automatically curb down if we pay focus on what and how are we treating the environment around us. At last, I would leave you all with a question. Before sustainable consumption and production comes in our life, the green wave comes in our life, are we right now, as citizens of any nation, let that be, are sustainable in our behavior and in our responsibilities? Because something as small as picking up your bottles and throwing it in your dustbin, if that is something you're not doing, then I think resilience, environment, well-being, those are very far-fetched topics. Start with those small things in life. Pick up those bits in your own life and put them where they have to be. Organize them. It is only then when life, well-being and resilience and everything would come automatically. So at the end, with this question, I would leave all of you stirred and go home and think about it. That am I, as a citizen of this world, not just the country, responsible enough? Thank you.
So after that philosophy of one step at a time, we also take another step ahead and call our next presenter, who will be speaking on refueling growth, clean energy and green energy from our guest invitee, Egypt, Mr. Manar Labib. All right, Miss Manar Labib, my apologies.
Good evening, everyone. It's a great honor to be here. Okay. It's such a great honor to be here tonight, and I'm really blessed to share my thoughts about my topic in such a big event. So, since the modern world has been facing a lot of challenges, these challenges that directly affect safety and quality of life on our planet. One of these challenges is energy resources. It's well known that Indian government has been supporting environmentally friendly energy resources. The government has also announced the goals and plans in terms of clean energy till to 2030 as following. First, India will reach its non-fossil energy capacity to 500 gigawatts by 2030. Also, by the same year, 50% of energy will be purely from clean energy resources. The government is also working on reduce the total projected carbon emissions by 1 billion tons, which is really massive number. According to the plan also, carbon intensity will be reduced to be less than 45%. Going further to 2070, the country will achieve the target of net zero, which considered as great contribution to climate change. Moreover, the country will be also easing rules, allow commercial and industrial consumers to switch to green source of electricity. With these stunning efforts, and along with this, in the same context, Egyptian government has significant contribution in using clean energy. The government has adopted flexible plan considering past over years events that totally affected the country, and proudly announced on official platform of the government, the country has reached 20% of its energy during 2022 from clean energy resources. Future-wise, the government has developed a study for ideal combination, technically and economically, regarding clean energy production by 2035. The Egyptian energy sector has started collaborating with EU in project of supporting the sustainable and integrated energy strategy till 2035. Note that this strategy had been approved by Supreme Council of Energy in 2016. According to this strategy, the country will achieve 45% of total energy as a clean energy over the country. Since India and Egypt have clear vision and also have respectful contributions, it's worthy to be mentioned that both countries have collaboration under ISA, International Solar Alliance, that been announced by Sri Narendra Modi in 2015. And during 2018, in the first session of the organization, Egypt had signed the framework that been ratified by 68 countries till the date. In the end, with these serious actions and clear visions, we hope for better tomorrow for our planet, because simply there is always plan B, but there is no planet B. Thank you all, and please, let's stand and work hard to make our planet the best place for living.
Taking the women's voice and opinion ahead, after Ms. Labib, I would like to call upon Ms. Kimia Tusadda Hafiz. I hope I'm getting her name correct. She would speak on purpose and reassessing the global financial order. Stage is yours.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, my dear fellows and participants. Actually, I am the most nervous right now. Since the ambassador and Mr. Jafir already give us a wide perspective of reordering global financial order. So please be patient on me. So I would like to remind you about what brings us to the topic of reassessing the global financial order. Besides 2008 financial crisis, please highlight how international financial organizations such as IMF and World Bank fail to manage international financial system, where they cannot well regulate the instability and volatility of exchange rates and capital flows. That's why in 2009, G20 initiated to focusing in empowering the financial infrastructure with two key points: financial literacy and financial inclusion. Financial literacy lays in four elements: budgeting, investing, taxation, and personal financial management. For your information, the Financial Literacy Index shows us the countries with the high index are dominated by Northern America, European, and Australia. While the financial inclusion is a concept about how each of individual can access financial services. In G20 countries, countries with high financial inclusion index are Australia, Canada, UK, and USA, while India in medium index and Indonesia in low index. Both countries, Indonesia and India, keep trying their best to improve the financial infrastructure through various programs of financial literacy and inclusion. So what are still the problems? As we know, financial infrastructure needs digital technology to develop. Unfortunately, as two sides of a coin, in some countries, digital technology still have lack of infrastructure, such as submarine cable, fiber access, rural broadband, high cost of broadband subscription, download speed, and digital skill. While in the other hand, in very developed countries, technology also have downside, such as privacy infringement, cybercrime, and market over-dominance. And what are India and Indonesia roles and agreement? India and Indonesia has a strong diplomacy bond and always be close friend country. In terms of economic agreement, both countries have not a tie on CECA, Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement. Each country have an important role in each region. With 5 trillion US dollar, just think how many zero behind the 5, India is the 5th largest economy in the world and the largest in South Asia, while Indonesia with 1.38 trillion US dollar is the 16th largest in the world and the largest in Southeast Asia. Both countries have the same vision on global economic policy and take a part in G20 to promote transformation on international financial organization. G20 also need to promote on new macroeconomic super system that focusing in prudential regulation, supervision, and accounting. Also, G20 need to promote massively and continuously educate people about basic financial skill and assist to develop technology and financial infrastructure, not only in G20 member, but whole world, in the spirit of Visudhaiva Kutumbakam, one earth, one family, one future. That's my 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Hafiz. Now I'd like to call upon the last of our student presenters, but definitely not the least, Ms. Sunita Nandwani, and she will speak on accelerating SDGs, exploring new pathways to the 2030 agenda. The floor is yours.
So being the last speaker in the row is actually difficult, but with your support, I'll do my best. We must care about the world which we will not see. These wise words by Mahatma Gandhi clearly summarizes the need to think and act for the future generations. Good evening to one and all present here. I'm Sunita Nandwani, research scholar from School of Commerce, Gujarat University, and I'm here to share my thoughts on the topic Accelerating SDGs, Exploring New Pathways to 2030 Agenda. The hope given by SDG 2015 was to end poverty, protect the planet, and to ensure peace and justice for the people around the world. This was the action plan for the humanity and is equally relevant for India in its totality. India has worked sufficiently well in a positive and progressive manner by designing and implementing various schemes and policies to achieve these goals. I'll name the few. To promote local manufacturing and startups, we have Startup India, Make in India, and Skill India. For endorsing gender equality and women-led development, we have Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, and Mahilai Haath scheme. For sponsoring accessible and affordable health for all, we have Ayushman Bharat and National Health Scheme. For developing clean and renewable sources of energy, we have Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana and Kusum scheme. For the use of digital tools and technologies in all the sectors of the economy, we have Atal Innovation Mission and Digital India. The digitization of Indian economy helped the government to transfer the benefits directly to the poor in crisis times. In the backdrop of COVID-19 pandemic, India succeeded to fight against the health crisis by various initiatives such as supply of oxygen concentrators and by supplying the vaccines to around 96 countries around the world. India is now the fastest growing economy. Now this growth signifies the support that other countries are giving to us. We received FDI of around 532 billion USD dollars from around 162 countries in 61 sectors in last few years. Though the Indian government is effectively implementing SDGs, but yet miles to go to achieve the target of several life-changing zeros, such as zero hunger, poverty, AIDS, and gender discrimination. You will be shocked to know that in G20 countries, women earns 77 cents for every $1 earned by men. So gender discrimination is yet the problem to be resolved. India is also struggling to achieve SDG 13 climate change and SDG 8 decent work according to the SDG report of 2022. Today, we suffer from multiple issues such as frequent natural and man-made disasters, epidemic and pandemics, environmental degradation and climate change, digital and income divide, food security, and lack of awareness of citizens about their own rights, duties, and freedom. For this, we need lots of things to be done. Again, with the increase in diversity and interdependence on the global economic ecosystem, geopolitical tensions and rivalry have intensified. Now, this could possibly lead to the reversal of global integration process. Today, international cooperation is not just an option, but compulsion. Systematic reforms are needed to bring the global governance in line with the new reality of multilateralism. There is a consensus for the shift in the role of multilateral agencies and to focus their attention on trade, representation, and lending to the underdeveloped and developing countries of the world. We also need shared management systems to mitigate the effects of climate change, effective integration of SDGs into the national development goals, negotiations and grassroots level implementation of SDGs, strong communicative potential among all the SDG members. We also need to bridge the digital and the income divide. We have to encourage the setting up of cooperative models like Amul. We have to promote One Health policy, including human, animal, and birds. We also have to work in partnership on many fronts. For this, for the first time, partnership for the goals have been stated as a separate 17th goal for the achievement of other goals. University, as one of the partner, can act as a synchronizing agent, helping the other partners through research to achieve their goals. We have to save the humanity from the cacophony of ideological banner and have to work for the betterment of the entire world in its complete vitality. Conflict and confrontation are not the solution to any problem, but wisdom is. Let's work together with the spirit of Vasudeva Kutumbakam and realize the 2030 agenda. Thank you. Namaste.
With this, we've come to the end of the second round, which comprised student presentations. I would now like to throw the floor open for any questions. If you could kindly please raise your hands if anybody has a question. Could we please have a hand mic presented to the gentleman? Kindly identify yourself and the person to whom the question is addressed. Thank you.
Very good evening, sir. Myself, Rahul Jha. I'm pursuing English literature from the Gujarat University as well. So, my question to Sir, Mr. Choi, sir. Sir, you gave us a 6T and the last T was trust. And my question is regarding THINK20 about the G20 communique which happened, which is back to the day before yesterday. Like when the finance ministers of G20 has to give a communique, and which there one issue which on the war issue which they haven't convened anything, and so the communique was postponed. And the second issue is which personal, because you are an ambassador, as we all know that US ambassador to India has not been there for 18 months. So how this trust issues which we are facing right now, as well as we are presiding in G20, we are going to direct through this, and how we going to resolve out of this? This is my question to you, sir. Thank you.
These are interesting questions that you have asked. There is an English saying that one swallow does not a spring make. So the point here is that simply because the G20 finance ministers and central bank governors could not issue a joint communique does not mean that we cannot build consensus. And why are we surprised that there are differing opinions? We shouldn't be surprised, because we have seen that at the United Nations for a fairly long time now, the global community has been unable to reach consensus. There are deep divisions in the UN Security Council, and India has consistently abstained on a number of votes, as you know, number of resolutions, both within the UN Security Council and in the General Assembly as elsewhere. So it only goes to show that there are these differences. And so we cannot expect the G20 to provide a panacea to the problems of the world overnight. However, it still remains one of the most representative groups, as I said, and we must make every effort to build consensus, however small, through the power of conviction, by working, as I said, bilaterally, trilaterally, plurilaterally within the G20, and Japan and India and Indonesia, Brazil, South Africa, other well-meaning partners can play a role in this regard. So let's not be too surprised. Let's not judge, the G20 as a whole based on one particular meeting. Remember that the G20 has always quite successfully reinvented itself. It used to be an official level structure in the 1990s after the Asian financial crisis of 1997. A few years later, I think around 2002, it was elevated to ministerial level and that central bank governors track. And in 2008, after the global financial and economic crises of 2007, 2008, it was further elevated to apex level, as in, head of state, head of government. And it has, provided certain helpful suggestions whenever there have been past crises. So let us, look at the future, the next several months until the end of this year, with great optimism, and let's work together. India is capable of